Yeah, I mean, Europeans will have been quite encouraged by the words spoken at that press conference last night. The issue is that both of the presidents were making assertions about what other people are saying that don't necessarily seem to be borne out by reality. So you had President Trump saying that Vladimir Putin told him that he would have no problem with European NATO troops being on the ground in Ukraine to enforce any peace deal. That, of course, is the exact opposite of what the Kremlin has been saying. So either Trump was making that up or he betrayed something told to him in confidence by Vladimir Putin, in which case I think the Kremlin will be quite upset about their maximalist position being exposed. So it's unclear why he said that. And then sitting next to him, you had President Macron saying that Trump had told him during the meeting that the U.S. is willing to give security guarantees to any of those European NATO forces in Ukraine. That is, again, the opposite of what the Trump administration has been saying, particularly from Pete Hegseth here in Brussels at NATO a couple weeks ago. And Trump did not confirm that during the press conference, nor did his social media post about the reading or any statements coming from the White House. So it could have been just a lot of words, but the words were encouraging. For the Europeans, it is essential that they get that U.S. cover for committing any German, French, British troops in Ukraine to enforce that peace deal. And they're also insisting on a seat at the table, saying, okay, if you're asking us to enforce this deal, we need to have a seat at the table in crafting it. At the moment, they do not have a seat on the table. And this is a really existential question for Europeans, because the fear is that if those German, French, British troops are in Ukraine and they don't have the Article 5 protection from the US saying to Russia, if you attack those French troops, we will attack you, then Russia will be tempted to indeed attack them. That could start a Russia-EU war in which the United States may not defend Europe. And of course, that would be a catastrophe. So this is really essential. And that's why so many of these European leaders, those that are willing to consider sending their own troops to Ukraine to enforce any peace deal, are saying they cannot do so without security guarantees from the US.
Stay with us, Dave. I'm going to talk as well to Ketevan Gordestani, our international affairs editor and former Washington correspondent, of course, as well. Ketevan, what do you see as the positives of the meeting?
Well, look, Emmanuel Macron's goal, a meeting with Donald Trump, was sort of to salvage what is left of the transatlantic relationships after days of attacks, of insults even from the United States towards the Europeans, towards the Ukrainians. It seems that he managed to at least bring that relationship back from the brink. Now, the bar is pretty low given what has happened in the past couple of weeks, but the tone has changed a little bit. And Dave was mentioning some of these elements. Now, yes, Donald Trump did not agree to have that U.S. backstop, for example, that the Europeans have been asking for. But unlike past comments from some of the U.S. Administration, he did not explicitly shut it down. And he said he welcomed the fact that the Europeans were stepping up. The same thing goes with what he said about Putin's being supposedly on board with having those troops there. You also saw that he responded to a question by our reporter, Sonia Dridi, who asked him, are you willing to meet with Zelensky? And he said, yes, we're going to meet maybe at the end of the week, maybe next week. This is a pretty big departure from his rant on Truth Social, calling Zelensky a mediocre actor and a dictator. So it seems that the tone has lightened up a little bit when it comes to Donald Trump. And part of that is Emmanuel Macron using his relationship with Donald Trump. Much has been said of their past relationship. Remember, Emmanuel Macron was already president during Donald Trump's first term, so they have had ups and downs, but they do have a special relationship, and you saw that in the Oval Office, especially those handshakes, those laughs, those, the sort of relationship between the two men. And I think that allows Emmanuel Macron to sort of push back sometimes. He sort of balances it out. He praised Donald Trump for the fact that he got the ball moving, if you will, by speaking to Vladimir Putin. He praised Donald Trump for his deal-making abilities. He praised Donald Trump for using power for diplomacy, but he also pushed back on certain elements. He repeated multiple times that Russia was the aggressor, that Russia was supposed to pay reparations. He also pushed back, and that was, I think, one of the big moments of that Oval Office meeting when Donald Trump was saying once again that Europe wasn't paying enough for supporting Ukraine. And Emmanuel Macron interrupted him, put his hand on his arm, and said, actually, no. And he said, let's get the facts straight here. Europe is actually contributing technically more than the United States. Not many leaders have been able to do that. And the reaction on social media from the U.S. media, from a lot of Democrats was sort of, wow, Emmanuel Macron fact-checking live Donald Trump in the Oval Office was sort of the reaction. But I think all of this is pretty good, but it could, as Dave said, be just words, and it could also as quickly turn the other way with possibly a next call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and this could all change in the blink of an eye if things don't go Donald Trump's way. And I think one of the key elements there to look for is whether there will be that agreement on the rare earths in Ukraine with President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Yeah, and on all of bed of roses, is it?
No, absolutely not. And I think one of the things missing from this meeting were sort of concrete steps forward. It looks encouraging, but so far, Donald Trump hasn't changed on some of his main positions. As I said, he repeated multiple times that Europe wasn't doing enough to support Ukraine. He was asked whether he would use the same word he used for Vladimir Zelensky, dictator, to speak about Vladimir Putin. And to that, he said, I do not use those words lightly, and refused to answer the question. He also didn't give any clear position from the United States on that security guarantee, on what the Europeans are asking for. He's also, more importantly, still refusing to blame Russia for the invasion of Ukraine. And we saw this meeting happening at the same time in New York at the time were those resolutions, one at the General Assembly, one in the UN Security Council, where the U.S. joined the Russians to vote once yes, once no, but opposed to the rest of the European alliance. And that G7 meeting that happened before Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron met, that G7 meeting still doesn't have a statement, supposedly because the Americans are refusing to call Russia the aggressor. So still a lot to move forward there, and a lot could still go very wrong. And this, of course, having consequences for the Ukrainians.
Well, let's go back to Dave Keating in Brussels. Dave, bearing in mind what Ketavan said there, what you said before as well, where does Europe go from here? We've got the EU's foreign policy chief talking to Trump today. In theory, anyway, we've got Keir Starmer as well, the British Prime Minister, talking to him on Thursday, haven't we?
Yeah, a bunch more meetings coming up this week, starting with Kaja Kallas going to Washington today to meet the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Now, she'll be coming fresh from these talks with EU national foreign ministers yesterday. She's trying to push the idea of an additional 20 billion euros from the EU to Ukraine in military aid. That did expose some divisions between member states yesterday. And then, of course, Thursday, we have that much anticipated meeting between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. Now, this double act that we have this week between Macron and Starmer could end up being a kind of good cop, bad cop routine, because as Ketavan was just mentioning, Macron has a previous relationship with Donald Trump from the first term. Starmer does not. And in fact, he's gotten off to quite a rough start with this administration, with Elon Musk, who's basically running the show in D.C. these days, saying horrible things about Keir Starmer, saying that he should resign. So it may be that on the British government side, they're calculating, look, there's no way we're going to have this kind of chummy, friendly meeting that Emmanuel Macron was able to have. Our best bet here is to go in being the bad cop, being a little more stern. Now, that could backfire spectacularly. And you can imagine that if Starmer tried to live fact-check Donald Trump during a press conference, Trump wouldn't be quite as forgiving as he was with President Macron. So that press conference will be quite interesting. Then next week, we have this emergency European Council summit that's been called by Council Chair Antonio Costa. It's unclear right now whether Starmer will be at that summit. It may be that the optics of attending 2 EU summits in a row, he just came here a couple weeks ago, might be difficult for him politically, domestically. But there they really have to confront this question about whether they are willing to send European troops into Ukraine in order to enforce that peace deal. And then, of course, they have to deal with the bigger existential question here, which is the collapse of the transatlantic alliance, the loss of the United States as Europe's military protector, and where they go from there. And that is going to be really key for Germany's new chancellor, Friedrich Merz, who was just elected. He's been saying that there may need to be some kind of European NATO solution. Lots of fresh ideas coming from Germany, which has not been giving very many fresh ideas lately. So that's going to be a very interesting summit next week. We'll see if it actually results in any concrete decisions.
Lots more diplomacy to come over the next few weeks, as Dave was saying there. Dave Keating there, our correspondent in Brussels, and Ketavan Gurjistani, our international affairs editor here on set. Thanks.